The silver compass necklace caught the afternoon light as it swung against Lauren's collarbone, the tiny arrow spinning before settling north. She fastened it every morning without thinking, a ritual as automatic as brushing her teeth or checking her phone. The delicate chain was tarnished in places, showing its age, but Lauren had never considered replacing it. On the back of the compass, engraved in script so small you had to squint to read it, were the initials AL and LP, circled by the words True North. Autumn had given it to her their freshman year, laughing as she said best friends needed something more permanent than matching sweatshirts, something that would last beyond college and roommate assignments and whatever life threw at them. That September morning felt like crystallized promise, the kind of day that photography students spent hours trying to capture but never quite could. The quad smelled of fresh-cut grass mingling with the rich aroma of coffee from the cart near the library steps, where students lined up clutching their reusable cups and textbooks. Maple leaves were just beginning to bronze at the edges, a few already drifting down to collect in corners and against building foundations. The air carried that particular crispness that made every college student believe this semester would be different. More focused, more disciplined, more alive. Squirrels darted between oak trees, their movements frantic as they prepared for winter months still comfortably distant. Lauren and Autumn had claimed their usual bench near the fountain, the one with the carved initials from decades of students, their backpacks dumped beside them, philosophy textbooks unopened as they split a cranberry scone from the campus bakery and debated whether to go to the Sigma Delta party that Friday. Autumn tilted her face toward the sun, eyes closed, her dark hair spilling over the bench back and catching the light in subtle auburn highlights. She wore her favorite denim jacket, the one with the embroidered sunflower on the shoulder that her grandmother had sewn on years before. Its yellow petals slightly faded from wear and washing, but still vibrant enough to draw compliments from strangers. 1 hour, she said, her voice lazy with contentment, eyes still closed against the brightness. We show up, we prove we have social lives, we leave before anyone gets weird, or the cops show up. Lauren remembered laughing, remembered agreeing, remembered the easy confidence of 19-year-olds who thought they understood risk and could navigate it effortlessly. The fountain behind them burbled peacefully, coins glinting beneath the water's surface, wishes made by freshmen who still believed in the campus legend that tossing a quarter guaranteed passing grades. A frisbee sailed overhead, followed by shouted apologies. Someone's Bluetooth speaker played indie music at a volume just loud enough to create atmosphere without annoying. It was perfect. It was ordinary. It was the kind of moment you don't recognize as precious until it becomes the last normal thing you remember. If you're drawn to stories where answers take years to surface, where ordinary moments hide extraordinary turns, and where the persistence of love proves stronger than silence, consider subscribing. These stories matter because they remind us that unresolved cases aren't just statistics, they're real people waiting to be found. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let's build a community that believes some mysteries deserve to be solved, no matter how long it takes. The party was exactly what they'd expected. Too many people crammed into a house designed for half that capacity. Bass rattling the windows hard enough that Lauren could feel the vibrations in her chest. Red plastic cups everywhere. On tables, windowsills, in people's hands. And the unmistakable smell of spilled beer mixing with too much cologne, and the sweet smoke drifting from the back deck. They stuck together at first, shoulder to shoulder in the crowded kitchen, where the noise was slightly more bearable, talking to a girl from their sociology class about an upcoming paper on family systems. The girl, Jen, or maybe Jenna, kept getting interrupted by people pushing past to reach the keg in the corner, her voice rising to compete with the music pounding from the living room. Autumn checked her phone twice in 15 minutes, her expression difficult to read in the shifting light from someone's color-changing LED strips. She glanced toward the door, then the windows, seemed restless in a way Lauren couldn't quite identify. Was she bored? Looking for someone? Regretting coming? Lauren almost asked, but someone turned the music louder, and the moment passed. Around 11:15, Autumn leaned close to Lauren's ear, shouting to be heard. "I'm stepping outside for air. Too hot in here." Lauren nodded, watching as Autumn weaved through the crowd toward the back of the house. The back deck was popular with people who wanted to escape the chaos, or have quieter conversations, or smoke without setting off alarms. Lauren saw Autumn push through the sliding glass door, saw her lean against the wooden railing, phone already in her hand. The blue light from the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the concentrated expression she wore when reading texts. Then, someone, their chemistry lab partner Mike, asked Lauren a question about next week's experiment, something about titration procedures, and she turned to answer. It was such an ordinary pivot, 30 seconds of distraction at most, maybe even less. When Lauren looked back toward the deck, scanning through the glass door past the people standing in the way, Autumn wasn't there. At first, there was no alarm, no spike of fear, just mild curiosity. People circulated at parties constantly. Autumn could have gone to the bathroom, stepped around the side of the house for better phone reception, run into someone she knew and gone to talk somewhere quieter. Lauren sent a text, "Where'd you go?" and continued her conversation with Mike, one eye periodically drifting toward the doorways and windows. 5 minutes passed. 10. Lauren checked the deck herself, stepping outside into the cool night air, peering into the ravine's darkness. Trees stood as black silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky, their branches swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of damp earth and dead leaves. "Autumn?" she called, feeling slightly foolish but increasingly uneasy. Nothing but the muffled bass from inside and the rustle of wind through leaves. She circled through the house, checking each room with growing urgency, asking people if they'd seen her friend. Denim jacket, sunflower patch, dark hair about this long. Blank faces, apologetic shrugs, a few people too drunk to process the question. She found Jenna again and asked if she'd seen Autumn leave. "No, sorry, I've been in here the whole time." By 11:40, Lauren's chest felt tight, her breath coming faster, hands trembling slightly as she dialed Autumn's number. It rang, and rolled to voicemail. "Hey, it's me, where are you? I'm getting worried, call me back." She tried again immediately. Same result. Again. The electronic sound of ringing seemed to mock her growing panic. By midnight, Lauren was in the front yard, away from the noise, calling Autumn's phone over and over, each voicemail more desperate than the last. "Autumn, this isn't funny, please call me." "Where are you? Just text me you're okay." "I'm about to call the police, please just pick up." Other partygoers drifted past, some glancing at her curiously, most too absorbed in their own dramas to notice hers. She convinced 2 other students to help search, Mike from chemistry, and a girl whose name she didn't catch but who seemed genuinely concerned. They checked the street in front of the house, parked cars, the small parking lot behind the neighboring apartment building, the footpath that led back toward campus through a small wooded section. Nothing. No sign of Autumn. No denim jacket draped over a bench. No sunflower patch catching streetlight. Just empty sidewalks and the distant sound of sirens heading somewhere else. At 12:30, Lauren called campus security. The dispatcher took her information calmly, said an officer would be there shortly, asked if Lauren could stay where she was. At 1:15, when campus security arrived and assessed the situation, they called the city police. The officer who responded was calm and methodical, somewhere in his 50s with gray hair and gentle eyes that had probably seen too much. Officer Vance, his name tag read. He took notes in a small spiral pad with a worn leather cover, asked questions in a measured tone designed to gather information without causing more panic. Had Autumn been drinking? Maybe a little, but not drunk. How did she seem emotionally? Normal? Fine? Maybe a little distracted. Had she mentioned meeting someone? No. Not that I heard. Any problems with a boyfriend? Family issues? Mental health concerns? No. Nothing like that. We're close, she would have told me. Did she have any reason to leave voluntarily? No, none. We came together. We were supposed to leave together. Officer Vance radioed for additional units to canvass the area immediately, walking the perimeter of the property with a flashlight, checking the ravine's edge, the nearby streets. He showed Autumn's student ID photo, a copy Lauren had on her phone, to other officers, to the few partygoers still lingering. The house had mostly emptied by then, people scattering at the first hint of police presence the way they always did, leaving behind only plastic cups, spilled drinks, and the faint pulse of someone's forgotten playlist still playing from a phone somewhere inside. By 2 in the morning, Lauren had given 3 separate statements to 3 different people. By 3, she was sitting in a campus security office under fluorescent lights that made everything look stark and unreal, giving a formal recorded statement to a detective who'd been called in. She described the denim jacket in detail, the sunflower patch her grandmother had sewn, Autumn's height and build, and the way she wore her dark hair usually down but sometimes in a braid. She mentioned Autumn's habits, her classes, her favorite coffee shop, the fact that she'd seemed slightly distracted lately but nothing alarming, nothing that suggested she'd want to disappear. She mentioned both compass necklaces, matching ones they'd bought freshman year, each inscribed with their initials, True North. The detective wrote it all down carefully. He explained, voice gentle with practiced sympathy, that most missing students turned up within 24 hours. They went home unexpectedly without telling roommates, stayed with friends, lost track of time, had personal issues they needed to work through alone. His tone was reassuring, but his eyes held the wariness of someone who knew statistics didn't comfort families when it was their child missing. Lauren didn't sleep. She returned to their dorm room as dawn turned the sky from black to gray to pale gold, and sat on Autumn's bed still wearing last night's clothes, staring at the bulletin board covered with photos. Them at orientation, at a concert, making silly faces in the dorm bathroom mirror, and ticket stubs and a postcard from Autumn's summer trip to the Oregon coast. Everything looked staged, like a museum exhibit of a life interrupted mid-sentence. The room smelled like Autumn's lavender lotion, and the vanilla candle she wasn't supposed to have but burned anyway. Lauren touched Autumn's pillow, her textbooks, the hoodie draped over her desk chair, as if touching these objects could conjure their owner. At 6 in the morning, when she could no longer delay, Lauren called Autumn's parents. The phone rang 4 times before Janet Leeds answered, voice thick with sleep. "Lauren, what's wrong?" Because calls at 6 a.m. were never good news. Lauren tried to explain what had happened, tried to be clear and factual, but her voice kept breaking, words tumbling over each other. She heard Janet's sharp intake of breath, heard her calling for Robert, heard the moment everything changed for them too. By Sunday afternoon, the full mobilization had begun. Autumn's parents, Janet and Robert Leeds, drove 4 hours from their home upstate, arriving hollow-eyed and moving with the mechanical precision of people in shock, operating on adrenaline alone. Janet gripped Lauren's hands in the dorm hallway, her fingers ice-cold despite the warm building, and said, "Tell me everything 3 times before Lauren could finish a sentence, as if hearing it again would change the outcome." Robert, quieter but equally devastated, spoke immediately with campus administration, with the police department's detective bureau, with anyone who would coordinate search efforts or provide information or do anything besides say they had to wait. Flyers went up across campus by Monday morning, hundreds of them printed at Kinko's on Janet's credit card. Autumn's sophomore photo, the one where she was mid-laugh, eyes bright and alive, the sunflower jacket visible at the edge of the frame. Missing. Last seen Friday, September 22nd, approximately 11:15 p.m., Sigma Delta Fraternity House. Contact information for campus security and the local police department. Physical description, clothing description, any information, please call. Lauren helped distribute them, hands shaking as she taped them to bulletin boards in every academic building, light poles along main streets, coffee shop windows, the post office, the grocery store, the bookstore. Every smooth movement of her hand felt like betrayal, like acceptance of a reality she couldn't process. The police conducted extensive interviews over the next week. Everyone who'd been at the party, neighbors along the entire street, residents of the apartment complex backing the ravine, local business owners, campus employees. A K-9 unit was brought in on Monday afternoon, a German shepherd named Duke who worked with intense focus. The dog traced Autumn's last known movements from the deck down toward the wooded slope, nose to the ground, handler following with careful attention. The scent trail ended abruptly about 50 feet into the trees, where Duke circled repeatedly, whined, and sat, indicating the end of the trail. Either Autumn had gotten into a vehicle there, or the scent had been disrupted by rain that had fallen Saturday afternoon, or something else had happened that broke the trail. The handler couldn't say which. Speculation rippled through campus like a virus, mutating as it spread. She'd fallen into the ravine and was injured somewhere people hadn't looked yet. She'd run away, overwhelmed by school stress or relationship problems. She'd met someone at the party and left willingly. Maybe was too embarrassed to come back. She'd been taken, abducted by someone who'd been watching and waiting. Each theory felt both plausible and impossible, supported by fragments of logic, but undermined by everything Lauren knew about her friend. By Wednesday, a volunteer search party had formed. More than 200 people, including students, faculty, staff, community members responding to social media posts and news coverage. They fanned out through the ravine and the extensive woods beyond in organized lines, checking under fallen logs, behind boulders, in culverts where water channeled after rain, through thick underbrush that tore at clothes and skin. Lauren walked until her legs ached, and then kept walking, eyes scanning endlessly for denim, for dark hair, for the sunflower patch, for anything that didn't belong to the landscape. They found old beer cans, a rusted bicycle frame, a child's sneaker bleached white by weather and sun, a homeless encampment that had been abandoned months earlier. Nothing connected to Autumn, nothing recent, nothing that mattered. The university held a vigil on Thursday evening, 1 week after the disappearance. Hundreds of people gathered in the quad near the fountain where Lauren and Autumn had sat just days before discussing whether to go to a party that would change everything. Candles flickered in the growing darkness. The campus chaplain spoke about hope and faith and community. Janet Leeds stood at the microphone, voice remarkably steady, and thanked everyone for searching, for caring, for not giving up. Autumn is out there somewhere, she said. We just need to find her. Please. If anyone knows anything at all, come forward. Lauren stood beside her, compass necklace cold against her chest, and thought about true north, about how Autumn was supposed to be her true north, her constant. And now she was spinning without direction. On the 8th day, the following Wednesday, a promising lead emerged that briefly transformed everyone's hope into something almost painful in its intensity. A gas station attendant 2 towns over, a college student himself working the night shift, reported a young woman matching Autumn's description purchasing snacks and asking for directions on Saturday morning, roughly 12 hours after she'd vanished. He'd noticed her, he said, because she seemed disoriented, kept looking over her shoulder, asked where she was like she didn't know. He'd tried to ask if she needed help, but she'd paid quickly in cash and left. Security footage showed a grainy figure in a dark jacket, face partially obscured by the camera angle and the low quality of the older security system. Janet Leeds watched the footage 17 times in the police station, freezing frames, zooming in on pixelated details until the images dissolved into meaningless blocks of color. The jacket could have been denim. The hair could have been the right shade. The woman's height seemed approximately right. The woman had paid cash, $12 for chips, a sandwich, a bottle of water, and left in a sedan with out-of-state plates that were partially visible in the footage. Police tracked the vehicle through DMV records and rental agencies. The plates belonged to a rental car from an agency 30 miles away. The renter was a 43-year-old man named Gregory Fulton from Ohio, traveling for work as a medical equipment sales representative. His alibi was ironclad. He was verifiably at a sales conference 200 miles away during the entire window of Autumn's disappearance, with dozens of witnesses, hotel records, and conference attendance logs. The woman in the footage was his girlfriend, Ashley something, who'd borrowed the car for a weekend visit with her sister's family. Police located her within 24 hours. She was blonde, 3 inches shorter than Autumn, and had no connection to the case whatsoever. She hadn't been anywhere near campus that weekend. The lead evaporated, leaving Janet Leeds sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her chest. Robert sat beside her, one hand on her back, his own face carved into lines of grief that had appeared in just over a week. Lauren sat across from them, helpless, thinking about hope and how it was sometimes crueler than despair. Lauren tried to maintain some version of normalcy because people kept telling her she had to, that Autumn would want her to, that she couldn't let her own life stop. She attended classes and watched professors' mouths move without processing words. She turned in assignments that she wrote in fugue states and didn't remember completing. She sat through lectures where information slid past her without meaning, leaving no impression. She ate because her friends made her eat, slept in brief, troubled intervals because exhaustion eventually forced it. At night, she stared at Autumn's empty bed and the compass necklace on her own nightstand. She wore it constantly now, a talisman that felt both comforting and accusatory. True north. What good was north when your best friend vanished in the time it took to turn your head? The semester ground forward with mechanical inevitability. Halloween passed, decorations in store windows feeling obscene in their cheerfulness. Thanksgiving break arrived. Lauren went home and couldn't explain to her own parents why she felt like a ghost in her childhood bedroom. Why the comfort they offered felt like sandpaper against raw wounds. They asked gentle questions she couldn't answer. They suggested she might want to transfer schools, start fresh somewhere without the memories. She returned to campus for final exams feeling older than her parents. For the spring semester, she changed dorm rooms, unable to sleep another night in the space that still smelled faintly of autumn's lavender lotion no matter how many times housing services cleaned it. She boxed Autumn's belongings carefully with Janet's supervision, each item a small death. Clothes that would never be worn again, textbooks for classes never finished, the stuffed elephant from childhood that Autumn had been too sentimental to leave home. They left the box with campus police in case Autumn came back. In case. The Leeds family hired a private investigator in December. Unable to simply wait for police who had other cases, other missing people, limited resources. The investigator, a former state trooper named Gordon Reeves, late 60s with a military bearing and sad eyes, worked methodically through Autumn's digital footprint. Social media accounts, emails, banking records, cell phone data, browsing history, everything that left a trail in the modern world. The last ping from Autumn's phone had come from a tower servicing the fraternity house neighborhood at 11:43 p.m. After that, nothing. Either the phone had been destroyed, powered off, or taken out of range of any cell tower. Reeves noted in his reports that Autumn had no recent concerning communications, no unusual purchases, no travel plans, no warning signs. Her accounts showed normal college student activity right up until she vanished. Textbook purchases, coffee shop transactions, a monthly transfer from her parents for living expenses. If she'd planned to disappear, she'd left no trace of preparation. Winter became spring. Classes continued. Vigils were held on the 3-month anniversary, the 6-month anniversary. Each one was smaller than the last as attention faded, as other dramas captured campus focus, as Autumn became a cautionary tale told to freshmen about staying together at parties. Lauren attended every vigil, stood beside Janet and Robert, who aged in fast forward, watched their faces settle into permanent expressions of loss. Summer arrived. Lauren took classes and worked at the campus bookstore, unable to imagine leaving, tethered to this place where Autumn had last been seen. She sorted textbooks and rang up purchases and answered questions from summer session students who didn't know, couldn't know, that she was the girl whose roommate had vanished, that she carried that identity now alongside her own name. The 1-year anniversary brought renewed media attention. Local news segments, a feature in the campus paper, renewed social media campaigns. Lauren did an interview, Janet and Robert did several. Detective Brennan made statements about the ongoing investigation. The coverage lasted a week, then faded again. The case remained officially open, but Lauren watched it slide down priority lists as newer crises emerged. Newer missing persons, newer tragedies demanding attention. By year 2, Lauren had changed her major from philosophy to social work. If she couldn't find Autumn, maybe she could help other families navigate systems that felt designed to frustrate and exhaust. She volunteered with a nonprofit organization that advocated for missing persons' families. Learned about the gaps in police resources and jurisdiction issues, and the legal complexities that made some cases harder to solve. She learned about NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, a database that tracked unidentified remains and tried to match them to missing persons. She learned how understaffed police departments struggled with caseloads that never stopped growing, how detectives juggled dozens of active cases simultaneously, how cold cases piled up despite everyone's best intentions. Detective Alice Brennan, who'd taken lead on Autumn's case from the beginning, explained some of the procedural realities during one of their periodic check-ins at a coffee shop near the police station. They'd developed a relationship built on shared investment in finding answers. Brennan explained that missing adults, especially those over 18 with no evidence of foul play, occupied an ambiguous legal space. Police couldn't force someone to maintain contact with family. If Autumn had left voluntarily, and there was no definitive proof she hadn't, she had the legal right to disappear, to start over, to cut contact with her former life. Brennan said this gently, but the words still landed like stones in Lauren's chest. Still, Brennan worked the case when she could. She'd submitted Autumn's DNA profile to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, where it was checked regularly against DNA collected from unidentified human remains found across the country. She networked with detectives in neighboring states, attended conferences on cold cases and missing persons, kept Autumn's file active and visible in the department. She told Lauren that cases sometimes broke in unexpected ways. A decade-old fingerprint suddenly matched when database software was upgraded, a deathbed confession from someone involved, a chance encounter that prompted new information. You couldn't predict the moment, couldn't force it. You just had to stay ready, stay alert, keep the case alive in your mind. Years folded into each other, distinct and yet blurred. Year 3, Year 4. Lauren graduated with her bachelor's degree, started a master's program in social work, took a position with a family services agency working with high-risk families and children in crisis. She maintained regular contact with Janet Leeds, who'd started a small foundation offering grants to families searching for missing loved ones, help with private investigator costs, travel expenses for searches, legal fees, reward money. The foundation's logo featured a compass rose, true north, carved beneath it. The image made Lauren's chest ache every time she saw it on documents and websites, but she helped with grant applications and fundraising events anyway. She dated occasionally, never seriously. How did you explain the weight of carrying someone else's absence? The way it colored everything, made Joy feel guilty, made plans feel presumptuous? She went to a friend's wedding in Year 4 and felt herself observing from outside her own life, watching people celebrate futures when hers still felt stuck in that September night. She moved to an apartment across town, packed the compass necklace carefully in tissue paper and a velvet box. She wore it less frequently, but couldn't imagine discarding it. Couldn't imagine the day she'd stop waiting. By Year 5, Detective Brennan retired, handing off her caseload including Autumn's file to a younger investigator named Tim Garrison, who meant well but lacked Brennan's personal investment. He called Lauren periodically with updates that were really non-updates. No new information, case still active, call if you hear anything. Lauren accepted that she might never know what happened, that this uncertainty might be permanent, a question mark she'd carry forever. She worked with 12 families at any given time, cases involving domestic violence, child welfare concerns, mental health crises, substance abuse. She learned to hold space for ambiguous loss, that particular agony of not knowing whether to mourn or hope, how to grieve someone who might still be alive somewhere. She learned to recognize resilience in unexpected places, found meaning in helping others even when she couldn't help herself. She adopted a cat, a gray tabby named Pepper who tolerated her long work hours and middle-of-the-night grief spirals. She started therapy, processing trauma she'd been carrying without acknowledging. She learned, slowly and incompletely, to live with not knowing. Year 6 arrived with the slow turn of seasons that now felt cyclical, rather than progressive. Lauren had learned to recognize the anniversary of Autumn's disappearance without it destroying her completely, to think of her friend with sadness and love, rather than the raw, gasping grief of those first months. She wore the compass necklace on Autumn's birthday, and on September 22nd. Otherwise it stayed in its velvet box on her dresser beside her earrings and watch, and the other small objects that marked a life. September 22nd, 6 years after that Friday night, Lauren had a morning meeting scheduled at the university's Family Resource Center. The center partnered with her agency on cases involving students with children, young parents trying to balance coursework and caregiving, navigating systems that weren't designed for their circumstances, connecting them with childcare subsidies and emergency funds and counseling services. She'd scheduled a consultation about a client family, needed to review their eligibility for certain programs. She'd parked near the East Campus entrance in a visitor spot, walked across the familiar grounds that no longer triggered panic at every dark-haired woman she passed. The campus looked largely unchanged. Same buildings, same quad, same fountain where she and Autumn had sat planning to attend a party. Students rushed past with backpacks, absorbed in phones and conversations. New freshmen, probably, who hadn't been born when Autumn disappeared. The world had continued turning. Lauren had learned to turn with it, even as part of her remained forever frozen at 19, watching her best friend walk through a sliding glass door. She was walking toward the education building, coffee in hand from the campus cart, mentally reviewing notes about her client case, when she saw them. A woman was crouched on the sidewalk about 20 feet ahead, adjusting a small child's jacket zipper with practiced maternal efficiency. Two other children stood beside her, a boy around 5 holding a lunchbox decorated with dinosaurs, a girl maybe 3 clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. The woman wore jeans and a cardigan the color of forest moss, hair pulled into a messy bun, wire-frame glasses. She said something to the boy that made him grin widely, then stood and took the girl's hand. As she turned slightly, profile catching the September morning light, Lauren's coffee cup slipped from her fingers. The woman had Autumn's face. Not similar, not reminiscent. Not the kind of resemblance that made you do a double-take before realizing you were wrong. This was exact. The specific angle of her jaw, the precise way her eyebrows arched, the small crescent scar near her left temple from a childhood bike accident involving a tree branch. Lauren knew that face better than her own. She'd stared at it across dorm rooms and library tables and late-night diners. She'd described it to police in exhaustive detail. She'd printed it on 1,000 flyers. She'd dreamed it for 6 years, watched it age in her imagination, wondered if she'd recognize it after time and distance changed it. But this woman looked exactly like Autumn had at 19, barely aged at all, as if she'd stepped out of that party and directly into this moment. The woman didn't notice Lauren standing frozen on the path. She was entirely focused on her children, guiding them gently toward the building's side entrance, the one that led to the university's child care center. The boy skipped ahead slightly. The woman called out, "Careful on the steps, buddy," in a voice that stopped Lauren's breath completely, emptied her lungs, made the world tilt sideways. That voice. That exact cadence and tone and the specific way she softened consonants. That was Autumn's voice. Lauren's body moved before her conscious mind caught up, feet carrying her forward without permission, closing the distance in 5 quick strides. She was close enough now to see details that confirmed rather than contradicted. The woman's cardigan was slightly pilled at the elbows from wear. Her sneakers were generic canvas ones worn at the heels. A simple wedding ring glinted on her left hand. A diaper bag hung from her shoulder. She looked like a grad student, a young mother, someone living an ordinary life. She looked like Autumn. "Autumn?" Lauren's voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper, breaking on the second syllable. The woman turned, and for a fraction of a second her face was completely open, unguarded. Then her expression cycled rapidly through confusion, alarm, something that looked like recognition immediately suppressed, and finally fear. For 3 full seconds they stared at each other while the world continued around them. Students rushing past to make 8 o'clock classes, a grounds crew mower humming somewhere across the quad, children's voices from the child care center's playground. "I'm sorry," the woman said carefully, voice controlled but trembling slightly. "I think you have me confused with someone else." She shifted her body, positioning herself between Lauren and the children, a protective stance. "It's Lauren." Lauren could hear the desperation in her own voice, didn't care. "Autumn, it's me, Lauren. We were roommates. You vanished 6 years ago after the Sigma Delta party, and everyone's been looking for you. Your parents, the police, everyone. And I thought—" The words tumbled out too fast, too desperate, colliding with each other. The woman's face had gone pale, color draining from her cheeks. I'm not who you think I am. My name is Clara Bennett. I don't know anyone named Autumn." But her hand was trembling visibly as she reached for her daughter, pulling the child closer, and her voice held a note that wasn't quite conviction. The little girl looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes, then at Lauren, uncertain whether this was normal adult conversation or something scary. "Mommy?" Lauren felt reality tilting, the ground unstable beneath her feet. This was Autumn. Every instinct, every cell in her body screamed absolute certainty. The scar, the face, the voice, even the way she stood with her weight on her left foot. All Autumn. But the woman's body language, her alarm, the way she held herself, everything signaled genuine distress at being approached by a stranger, genuine confusion, maybe genuine truth. "I'm sorry," Lauren managed, forcing her voice to steady. You look exactly like someone I knew, someone important, someone I've been searching for. I'm so sorry for startling you." "It's fine," the woman said, but she was already moving, already ushering the children toward the childcare entrance with quick, protective movements, glancing back once over her shoulder before disappearing through the door. Lauren stood rooted to the sidewalk, heart hammering so hard she could feel her pulse in her temples, in her throat, in her fingertips. Students flowed around her like water around a stone, shooting her curious glances as they passed. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, pulled up contacts, scrolled. Janet Leeds. She should call Janet immediately, tell her what she'd seen. But what had she seen? A woman who looked like Autumn but said she wasn't? 6 years of false sightings and mistaken identities and desperate hope had taught her caution, had taught her that grief made you see things that weren't there. But this felt different. This felt real in a way nothing else had. She called Detective Brennan instead, even though Brennan was retired, even though this wasn't protocol. Brennan answered on the third ring, surprise evident in her greeting. They hadn't spoken in over a year, their check-ins having faded as the case grew colder. "Lauren, what's wrong?" Lauren tried to keep her voice steady as she explained what she'd just seen, where, when, every detail. Brennan listened without interrupting, years of experience keeping her from judgment or premature conclusions. When Lauren finished, Brennan asked careful questions. How certain was Lauren? Could she have been mistaken? What exactly had the woman said? How had she reacted? "I'll make some calls," Brennan said finally. "Stay where you are. Can you do that? Don't approach her again. Don't scare her if it is Autumn and there's a reason she's been hiding. Just stay there and wait for me." Lauren could do that. She sat on a bench within sight of the child care center entrance, staring at the door, barely breathing. Campus security arrived first, a young officer Lauren didn't recognize who took her statement with professional sympathy that suggested he thought this was a grief-fueled mistake, but was too kind to say so directly. Then Brennan herself, moving quickly despite retirement, dressed in jeans and a sweater, but still carrying herself with cop posture and intensity. She had the file, actually had physical copies of the file in her car after all these years, Lauren realized, which said everything about how this case had stayed with her. They waited together. Brennan made calls, speaking quietly with current detectives, making requests about records checks and approach protocols. Around 10:30, parents began arriving for mid-morning pickup. Students with complicated class schedules, caregivers collecting children for medical appointments or therapy sessions or family obligations. Each time the door opened, Lauren's heart jumped. At 11:15, exactly 6 years to the minute after Autumn had stepped onto that fraternity house deck, the woman emerged with her 3 children. She saw Lauren immediately, saw Brennan standing beside her in a posture that suggested law enforcement even without a uniform, saw the campus security officer hovering nearby. She froze completely, face cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Then resignation, and maybe, Lauren couldn't be sure, relief. Brennan approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening, voice calm and gentle. "Ma'am, I'm Alice Brennan, retired investigator with the local police department. I used to work on missing persons cases. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right. Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" The woman's face went through those emotions again. Panic, resignation, something that really did look like relief. She glanced at her children, then back at Brennan, then at Lauren. When she spoke, her voice was different, quieter, drained of that careful control. "My apartment is 10 minutes away. They need lunch. We can talk there." Brennan nodded. "We can follow you. Lauren should come too." The walk felt surreal, processional. The woman, Clara, or Autumn, or whoever she truly was, pushed a stroller with the youngest child while the older 2 walked beside her, chattering about their morning, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Brennan and Lauren followed several paces behind, not speaking, both processing what might be about to happen. The apartment complex was married student housing, modest 2-bedroom units with playgrounds and shared laundry facilities. The woman's apartment was on the ground floor, toys scattered across the small living room, blocks, picture books, a toy kitchen, and children's artwork taped to the walls in crooked rows. She settled her children with sandwiches and juice boxes and turned on cartoons, speaking to them in a gentle voice that was pure maternal love and protection, before joining the adults in the tiny kitchen with barely enough room for a small table. She sat down heavily, wrapped her arms around herself, and stared at the table's laminate surface. For a long moment, no one spoke. "I need to know," Brennan said finally, voice still gentle but firm. "Are you Autumn Leeds?" The woman closed her eyes, and tears leaked from beneath her lids, even though they were still shut. When she opened them, they were red-rimmed, devastated. "I haven't heard that name spoken out loud in 6 years." Lauren made a sound she didn't recognize as coming from herself. Half sob, half gasp. Brennan reached out, steadied her with a hand on her arm, grounding her. "Tell us what happened," Brennan said. "Start wherever you can. Take your time." What emerged over the next 2 hours, told in halting starts and stops and long silences, was a story of coercion and control so gradual that Autumn herself hadn't recognized it until she was in too deep to see a way out safely. She'd met him 3 weeks before the party, a teaching assistant named Kyle Vernon in the history department. He'd seemed charming when they met at a campus coffee shop, intense in the way that felt flattering at 19. He'd talked about philosophy and history, and asked probing questions about her thoughts and dreams. They'd started seeing each other quietly because university policy prohibited TAs from dating undergraduates in their department, even though she wasn't in his classes specifically. The night of the party, she'd stepped outside to take his call because the music was too loud inside. He'd been drinking, she could tell from his voice, and was upset about something she couldn't quite follow. Something about seeing her talking to another guy at the library earlier that day, about her disrespecting their relationship by being friendly with other men, about how she clearly didn't care about him the way he cared about her. She'd tried to calm him down, told him they could meet the next day and talk in person, that he was misunderstanding what he'd seen. He'd said if she really cared about him, if she really loved him, she'd come see him right now, immediately, prove that he mattered to her. It was the oldest manipulation in abusers' handbooks, though she hadn't recognized it then. She'd walked down into the ravine where he said he was waiting, because she'd been 19, and hadn't yet learned that love shouldn't feel like obligation laced with fear. He wasn't alone. His roommate was with him, a guy named Justin or Jason, she'd never been entirely sure, and they were both drunk. What started as an argument about Autumn's supposed disrespect escalated quickly when she tried to leave, when she said she needed to get back to Lauren, that this wasn't the time for this conversation. Kyle had grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise but hard enough to stop her. They'd taken her phone when she tried to call for help. Kyle had said they just needed to talk this through, needed her to understand how much she'd hurt him by not respecting their relationship. The roommate had driven them in Kyle's car to a house off campus that Kyle's family owned, a vacant property between tenants, isolated enough that no neighbors would hear anything. Autumn stopped there, unable or unwilling to detail what came next. Brennan didn't push, recognizing trauma when she saw it. The pattern was clear enough without explicit details. Isolation, escalating control, Kyle's conviction that he loved her, and she needed to be protected from making bad choices that would hurt their relationship. By the time Autumn fully understood, she was being held captive rather than in a complicated relationship. She'd been isolated for weeks in a house with no neighbors close enough to hear. Her phone destroyed, her identification taken, her movements entirely controlled. The roommate, evidently terrified by his own involvement and what he'd helped make possible, had left after the first week, disappearing from Kyle's life entirely. Kyle had kept Autumn alone for months, moving her twice to different properties his family owned in different towns, convincing her gradually that if she ran, she'd be blamed for manipulating him, that no one would believe her version over his, that her parents would be ashamed of her choices, that Lauren would hate her for leaving that night. He'd allowed her gradually increasing freedom, but always accompanied, always monitored, always controlled. She'd learned which behaviors made him calm, which set him off, how to manage him for her own safety. 2 years in, she'd gotten pregnant. Kyle had been thrilled, convinced this proved their bond was real and eternal, that they were meant to be together forever. Autumn had realized the child was both trap and potential leverage, a vulnerability, but also a reason Kyle might relax his control. She'd played along, pretended contentment, waited for an opening. When their son was 4 months old, Kyle had needed emergency surgery for appendicitis. His control had slipped during his recovery when he was weak and medicated. Autumn had taken the child and run, making it to a women's shelter 3 states away, using resources for domestic violence survivors to disappear into a different identity. but she hadn't gone to police. She'd been too afraid of not being believed after so much time had passed, afraid of Kyle's family's money and legal connections, afraid of losing her son if a custody battle went wrong, afraid of Kyle's family's money and legal connections, afraid of losing her son if a custody battle went wrong, afraid that no one would believe her after so long. She'd changed her name legally through a program for domestic violence survivors, created Clara Bennett from nothing, enrolled at a different university under emergency assistance programs. She'd met Jason Bennett in a night class 2 years later. He'd known her as Clara from the start, had eventually learned the truth about her past, had married her anyway, and helped her build a life where she could feel safe. They'd had 2 more children. She'd become a substitute teacher, working with elementary students, finding purpose in small moments of helping kids learn. She'd existed in the space between her old life and her new one, never quite belonging to either, always looking over her shoulder, always terrified that Kyle would find her or that her carefully constructed identity would collapse. "I thought about coming forward so many times," she said, tears streaming freely now, her voice breaking, especially after my son was born, and then my daughters. I thought about my parents and what I was putting them through. I saw missing posters with my face. I knew what I was doing to everyone. I know what I did to you, Lauren. She looked up, meeting Lauren's eyes for the first time since they'd sat down. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. But I had my kids to protect, and the longer it went on, the more impossible it seemed. How do you explain 6 years of silence? How do you prove what happened when there's no evidence anymore? When it's just your word against his? When his family has money for lawyers and you have nothing?" Lauren found she couldn't speak around the grief and relief and anger and love all tangled in her throat. 6 years of searching, and the answer was this. Autumn had been stolen, then had chosen survival and her children's safety over resolution. There was no clear villain to hate except Kyle, no simple injustice to rage against. Just the messy, impossible reality of trauma and the calculations victims made to stay alive and protect the people they loved. Brennan was already on her phone, speaking in low tones with colleagues still on active duty, setting machinery in motion. Detectives would need to take formal statements. The district attorney would need to evaluate possible charges against Kyle Vernon. Kidnapping, unlawful restraint, sexual assault, possibly more. Autumn would need to decide what she was willing to testify to, what she could endure putting her children through for the sake of justice. Her husband would need to be involved. Her parents would need to be told. But first, there were parents to call. Janet Leeds answered on the first ring, as she always did, hope and dread in her voice like they'd been for 6 years. "Alice, what's happened?" Brennan spoke first, delivering the news with the care of someone who understood that relief and grief could occupy the same moment, that finding someone alive didn't erase the years they'd been gone. "Janet, we found her. We found Autumn. She's alive. She's safe. She's here with me now." Janet's sobs came through the phone speaker clearly enough that Lauren and Autumn could both hear them. Lauren heard Robert's voice in the background, urgent and confused, asking what's wrong, what happened, tell me. She heard the moment he understood, heard his own cry of disbelief and joy and anguish all mixed together. Brennan offered to arrange a meeting for the next day, suggested giving everyone time to process, to prepare emotionally. Janet said no, absolutely not. They were leaving immediately. They'd be there in 3 hours. Those 3 hours passed in strange suspension, time moving both too fast and impossibly slow. Autumn's children sensed the tension and grew clingy. Jason arrived home from his graduate teaching assistant position, took in the scene, his wife crying at the kitchen table, a retired detective, a stranger who was apparently his wife's former best friend, campus security hovering, and gathered his children into the other room without needing explanation. Autumn sat at the kitchen table, occasionally crying, occasionally falling into long silences where she stared at nothing. Lauren sat across from her, the compass necklace warm against her skin, and tried to reconcile 6 years of grief with the woman in front of her who was and wasn't the friend she'd lost. "Do you want to know why I kept it?" Lauren finally asked, pulling the necklace from beneath her shirt, holding it so the compass caught the light. "The necklace?" Autumn looked at it, fresh tears welling. "I figured you threw it away. After I didn't come back. After enough time passed that you must have hated me. I couldn't. It was all I had left of you, of us. True north. I threw mine away, Autumn said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. 2 years in, Kyle found it hidden in my shoe and demanded to know where it came from, who gave it to me, what it meant. I said it was my grandmother's. Just old jewelry. He didn't believe me. He said it proved I was holding on to my old life, that I wasn't committed to our relationship. So I threw it in a river while he watched, and I told him it didn't matter, it was just metal and glass. She looked directly at Lauren. But I lied. It mattered. It was the only piece of who I used to be that I had left, and I destroyed it to make him feel powerful, to keep myself safe. You did what you had to do to survive. Did I? Or did I take the coward's way? Other people escape. Other people go to police immediately. Other people... There is no coward's way in surviving, Lauren said firmly. There's just surviving. And you did. You're here. Your children are healthy and safe. You built a life. That took more courage than I can imagine. When Janet and Robert Leeds arrived, they moved through the apartment door like people walking through a dream, unable to trust their own senses, afraid that any sudden movement would shatter the illusion. Janet saw Autumn sitting at the kitchen table and made a sound, half sob, half gasp, entirely inhuman, and crossed the room in 3 strides. She stopped inches away, hands hovering in the air between them, afraid to touch and discover this wasn't real. Autumn stood slowly, and then they were holding each other, rocking slightly. Janet's hands in Autumn's hair like she used to do when Autumn was a child, both of them crying so hard they couldn't breathe. Robert stood back for a moment, letting them have it, his own face wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. Then he joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and the 3 stood in a tight knot of reunion that was both beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. 6 years collapsed and expanded simultaneously. The daughter they'd lost was here, alive, breathing. The daughter they'd lost was forever altered by what had happened in the years between. The path forward proved complex and painful in ways that news stories never captured. Kyle Vernon was arrested within 48 hours, charged with kidnapping, unlawful restraint, multiple counts of sexual assault, and several other charges that carried significant prison time. His family's money bought lawyers who immediately tried to paint Autumn as a willing participant, who'd later regretted her choices, who'd left that party voluntarily and stayed with Kyle by choice, who'd invented a kidnapping story years later for reasons the defense would leave to the jury's imagination. But evidence supported Autumn's version. The timeline of her disappearance matched her account perfectly. Medical records from her time with Kyle documented injuries consistent with restraint and abuse. Testimony from neighbors at the houses she'd been held in described her isolation, described never seeing her alone, described Kyle's controlling behavior. Digital forensics recovered communications between Kyle and his roommate from that time period that corroborated key details. The roommate himself, tracked down after years of hiding, eventually testified in exchange for reduced charges, confirming that he'd helped hold Autumn against her will, that he'd known it was wrong, that he'd been too afraid of Kyle to intervene. The trial took place 18 months after Autumn's reappearance. She testified remotely from a secure location, her children with Jason's parents, her husband holding her hand just out of frame. She spoke clearly and carefully about what she'd endured, about the escalation of control, about the fear that had kept her silent even after escaping, about the impossible choice between her own justice and her children's stability. She cried but didn't break. She answered the defense's questions without letting them twist her words. She was, Lauren thought watching from the courtroom, extraordinary. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Kyle Vernon guilty on all counts. He received 23 years. His family's money couldn't buy acquittal, though it tried. When the verdict was read, Janet Leeds collapsed in her seat, sobbing with relief. Robert sat frozen, unable to process that it was finally over. Lauren felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 6 years, but even before the trial, the healing, or what passed for it, had begun. Autumn started trauma therapy immediately, working with a specialist who understood coercive control and why victims often couldn't simply escape when outsiders thought they should. She learned that shame and guilt were common responses, that her decisions had been made under duress, that survival was not synonymous with complicity. She learned that the person she'd become as Clara Bennett wasn't a lie, but a necessary evolution, a way of staying alive. She learned that she could integrate both identities, could be both Autumn and Clara, could honor who she'd been and who she'd become. Janet and Robert had their own grief to process. They'd lost 6 years with their daughter, had become different people in her absence, had suffered in ways that didn't just disappear now that she was back. They needed to learn who Autumn had become, had to accept the grandchildren who were strangers, had to navigate the boundaries Autumn and Jason needed to maintain their family's stability. It wasn't easy. There were moments of friction, of misunderstanding, of hurt feelings when Autumn couldn't be what they remembered, or when they couldn't accept the choices she'd made. But they worked at it, attended family therapy, learned to build a new relationship rather than trying to resurrect the old one. Lauren and Autumn rebuilt their friendship slowly, carefully, with full acknowledgement that too much had changed for simple resumption. They met for coffee every few weeks, conversations sometimes flowing easily, sometimes stilted and painful. Lauren worked through her own anger, not at Autumn, but at Kyle, at the circumstances, at the systems that had made Autumn feel she couldn't come forward safely. She learned to hold space for complexity, to accept that happy endings were rarely simple or complete or without ongoing struggle. She learned that loving someone meant accepting their choices even when you wished they'd chosen differently. 2 years after the reunion, the Leeds Family Foundation expanded its mission. Working with Autumn's input and guidance, they developed resources specifically for survivors of coercive control who'd been reported missing but were afraid to come forward. They partnered with legal advocates, created guides for navigating identity changes and custody issues, and the criminal justice system. The materials emphasized that survivors' safety always came first, that coming forward was a personal choice, not an obligation, that there were ways to seek help without immediately exposing yourself to danger. They funded a hotline where people in similar situations could get advice anonymously. Autumn became a quiet advocate herself, never a public face but an influential voice behind the scenes. She spoke to law enforcement groups about why traditional missing persons protocols didn't always account for people who'd been conditioned to fear those protocols. She helped draft training materials emphasizing patient, survivor-centered approaches that prioritized safety over resolution timelines. She consulted on cases where families suspected coercive control might be involved in disappearances. She did this work carefully, protecting her children's privacy and her own mental health, but she did it because she understood better than anyone how complicated these situations could be. Lauren continued her work in family services, bringing lessons from her own experience to every case. She learned to recognize signs of coercive control in her clients' situations, to understand that people stayed in harmful circumstances for reasons that made sense within those circumstances, to ask better questions and listen more carefully to answers. She wore the compass necklace daily now, and sometimes people asked about it. She'd say it belonged to someone she loved, someone who'd been lost and found their way home eventually. That true north wasn't always a straight line. On September 22nd, 8 years after Autumn's disappearance, a small group gathered at the university's fountain where this story had begun in so many ways. Janet and Robert Leeds, now grandparents who video-called weekly with children who called them Nana and Pop. Lauren, still single but less lonely, with Pepper the cat and a full, meaningful practice. Autumn and Jason, their family expanding carefully, learning to trust the world again in small increments, their oldest son now in 2nd grade. Detective Alice Brennan, fully retired now but forever connected to this case that had shaped the end of her career. A few university officials, a handful of people from the foundation. They dedicated a bench, not as a memorial. Autumn was alive, present, placing her hand on the bronze plaque herself, but as a marker of before and after, of loss and recovery, of the persistence required to keep searching even when hope felt impossible. The plaque read, "For those who search and those who are found, may the path home always remain open." Autumn's oldest son, now 7 and curious about everything, asked what it meant. She crouched down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "It means that sometimes people get lost, but that doesn't mean we stop looking for them. And it means that if you're ever lost, there will always be people who want to help you find your way back." "Like a compass?" he asked, because he'd learned about compasses in school. "Exactly like a compass. If you or someone you know is experiencing coercive control or domestic violence, resources are available 24 hours a day. The National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 provides confidential support and can connect you with local services. For missing persons cases or concerns about someone who may be in danger but unable to reach out, contact the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System through local law enforcement agencies, or reach out to family justice centers for guidance on complex situations involving control and isolation. You don't have to have all the answers to ask for help. You don't have to be perfect to deserve safety. Autumn's story isn't typical, but it's not unique either. People vanish into circumstances that don't fit neat categories. Not quite runaways, not quite abductions in the traditional sense. They survive however they can, making choices that seem impossible from outside but are the only options available from within. Finding them requires patience, understanding, and recognition that resolution sometimes looks different than we expect. It requires accepting that someone can be both lost and found at the same time, that healing isn't linear, that justice doesn't erase what happened. The compass necklace Lauren still wears catches afternoon light as she walks across campus to meet Autumn for coffee, the arrow pointing north. But she's learned that true north isn't fixed. It's wherever you're trying to reach, whatever direction means survival in this particular moment. And sometimes, after years of impossible navigation through darkness and uncertainty and grief, it brings you home to something that looks different than what you lost, but is still worth finding.